So, following on the heels of Eyes of Wakanda, we received Marvel Zombies. Now, as far as I've learned, this series was inspired by a comic book of the same name. Also, this is a continuation of episode 5 of Marvel's What If. Initially, this was another series my interest was pretty low with. Probably because if you've seen one zombie project, you've seen them all. Hell, I couldn't even watch Walking Dead past 2 seasons before I got bored. Shortly before release, the series dropped a trailer, and I gotta say, holy crap, my interest was piqued. The trailer was pretty good. The music was that type of rock and roll most would see in any Resident Evil trailer, but somehow using Marvel heroes worked for me. It was a massive help that the project was not neutered by Disney. This project is rated TVMA, and honestly, if you were going to do zombies, I don't see any other way. I'll start with some pros before I go through the cons. The series centers around the average understanding that a small amount of survivors are given an opportunity to stop the plague from destroying the world. The story begins with Kamala Khan, Kate Bishop, and Riri Williams, although she's still a little her usual self.
I thought so too. The Shield Network is in tatters, but I'm getting a picture. You're on the Shield Network? Wait, how? Because
Of the three, I was happy to see Kate Bishop, since her cameo in the post-credit scene of The Marvels. Quite a few characters return whom we haven't seen since their original projects, one of them being the Eternal Icarus, locked in a constant fight with zombified Captain Marvel. Another character who was introduced in the MCU itself is Blade, a character conversation that's been going on since, well, this version of Blade, however, is not voiced by Mahershala Ali, but is known as Blade Knight, an avatar of the Moon Knight Khonshu after the death of Mark Spector. This implies the two of them may have originally formed a Midnight Suns team at some point, and despite the wait, Blade gets an awesome fight scene. Even the late Black Widow film plays a part in this series, as Melina Vostokov manages to use tech and science to control the zombies the same way we've seen in the Black Widow movie. Another character I was glad to see return is Shang-Chi. His introduction is given with a good amount of action as we see the initial zombie outbreak, as his character is centered in San Francisco. Speaking of which, the action is where this series shines. Being this show is done in animation, it really allows some characters to cut loose in ways we don't always see in live action film. Seeing Ms. Marvel and characters such as zombified Captain Marvel use their fighting abilities, we get to see more of what they are capable of. Another character I was glad that got some attention was Namor the Submariner. Of course, this is a character we haven't seen since the Black Panther sequel, Wakanda Forever, and interestingly, that character is never even hinted at anywhere since his reveal. Still, the series showcases his strength as well as the capabilities of the Atlanteans when they swarm Zemo's underwater base. It was actually interesting seeing the series make use of such locations like the raft. A few character relationships are definitely altered here, but it's not all bad. Characters like Jimmy Woo, Valkyrie, Death's Hand, and Katie get a chance to do a little more. With the relationship aspect, I enjoyed how strangers like Jimmy Woo and Death Hand become strange BFFs. Jimmy tries to buddy with DH, and he's completely badass but nonchalant, although he does die protecting Jimmy. We also see the godlike dynamics of Khonshu as he and Valkyrie have an extensive knowledge of one another. Some relationships still remain the same, as Shang-Chi and Katie still reiterate the fact that they are only best friends with no relationship outcome, or the father and daughter relationship between Red Guardian and Yelena. Zemo still holds his king-like cocky demeanor, even backstabbing the heroes when it serves his purpose. The series maintains its path with Marvel's What If, as you remember Black Panther, Spider-Man, and Scott Lang's head went to Wakanda to use the Mind Stone to help stop the zombies, not knowing zombie Thanos was waiting with the nearly completed Infinity Gauntlet. The sad passing of Chadwick Boseman prevented any lines from Black Panther, but it was clever having Spider-Man speak in his place. Seeing Black Panther sacrifice himself was a great and honorable send-off for the character. although his sacrifice did more harm than good, as the Infinity Gauntlet and the Vibranium together formed a new type of energy that had become the second MacGuffin of the series. This is something the series does interestingly, which is my best way to describe it. You know, most zombie series contain one or two, giving the main character something to fight for. We see this with the first Resident Evil film, it was the antivirus. In the first episode, we see Riri, Kamala, and Kate find a small device inside a zombie, believing it can be related to Pymtech and the Nova Corps, who could potentially help Earth. I will say the series does a great job of showing the worldly fallout by having leftover survivors turned into factions. One I found really interesting was the Biker Skrulls. I was disappointed we don't get to interact with this crew much, but seeing them thriving on Earth in episode 2 instead of hiding away was pretty cool. Bruce Banner takes another step in the story of Marvel Zombies after we've seen him in What If, set to face off against Wanda. Here his gamma powers interacted with the Infinity Energy, turning him into Infinity Hulk. He doesn't have anything new in terms of abilities outside of being particularly stronger and healing faster. Wanda once again returns as the Scarlet Witch, becoming the Queen of the Dead. The audience is giving a better understanding of how those reality warping powers can affect broken minds and bend them to her will. It shows how characters like Zombie Okoye and Zombie Captain America can still use their abilities even get creative in a fight. The series still keeps many of the MCU elements, such as Sean and Katie's karaoke, Thor sulking after losing to Thanos, or Wanda being completely insane. For the most part, I did enjoy the series, but the cons can't simply be ignored. The series does follow most post-apocalyptic movies, but the series leaves a ton of open-ended questions, one of those being the MacGuffin of the small device. We don't actually get to understand what the device does or its potential. We don't get to understand who was carrying it and why they swallowed it to begin with. I mean, the heroes take the ship into space to be confronted by the Nova Corps, but the team doesn't get answers from them. Another disappointment was the defeat of the Infinity Hulk. Okay, look, I understand if the threats are consistent and abundant enough, he could be worn down, which is something done in this fight. But I'm surprised the Hulk didn't utilize more of the Infinity power. I mean, someone let me know if that's possible. Bending reality is done through the Reality Stone. Maybe he could have erased most of the zombies. I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly critical. I was also a little lost about how the infection spreads for super soldiers, meaning Red Guardian. Okay, so based off of what happens in the upper half of Steve Rogers and later Red Guardian, we know it's possible to turn a super soldier. But Red Guardian had been bitten once in episode 2. He's been bitten by Steve Rogers and doesn't change. Now granted, in episode 3, he ate a ton of zombie remains, which could have contributed to the change, but maybe the series could have asked the question in episode 2. Another strange addition was the closure of the season, as we see Kamala finally gives in to Wanda and allows the Queen of the Dead to utilize her power. Why does she need Kamala's power? What makes it so necessary? We never learn that. Kamala is clearly trapped in a new reality where both Kate and Riri are still living and the world has returned to normal. However, we see a glitch that's interrupting this, and we hear Riri scream for Kamala as she managed to hack in, quote unquote, to speak to her. Okay, Riri being alive is not really a surprise. Rule of thumb in superhero genre, if you don't see a body, they're still alive. In episode 1, we see Friday return to hopefully save Riri as she is surrounded by zombies, which stands to reason Friday saved her owner in time. But how did Riri hack Kamala's subconscious? Did she develop tech to reach in her brain? How long did this take? We never learn since the series ends right there. Okay, I'm not entirely mad. Sometimes I really enjoy dark endings. It leaves this sense of reality we don't get to see in many superhero properties. I think I may have accepted it more if the writers had done a little more to explain the reason and outcomes to certain actions. But as I understand it, Marvel Zombies seemed to be the red-bearded stepchild that Marvel was hoping to exploit instead of wasting its potential. But all right, guys, those were my overall thoughts of Marvel Zombies. Let me know what you guys thought of the series. Like I said, I didn't think it was that bad. I just think it could have been better handled, especially since they wanted to get off the shelf. I thought they would have just taken a little bit more time to get it ready. I know they were actually thinking this series should have been released earlier, especially alongside things like Blade that was supposed to be released, as well as they were probably expecting a more positive outcome for things like Ironheart, but as we see how that turned out. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Later.